for. The F.Stop talk series enters the third week, I would say. We started on a Friday, I believe, and it's Friday again. It's been 2 weeks that we have had such wonderful speakers and interactions on this platform, and so much learning that all of us have had to take back from here. I'll acknowledge the presence of our today's speaker, Saumya. Hi, welcome to the forum, and thank you for consulting to speak here. Also, all our panelists, as I see them, Samar, Amit Mehra, Prashant Godbole, Dinesh Sir, Sudhir, Fauzan, Raj, hi, thank you for helping to moderate this session once again. Rakesh, Joseph, and Shobhan Parekh. Thank you, all of you, for being over here and making this platform so lively and interactive every single day. Before I go ahead and hand over things to Raj and Saumya, I would like to introduce F.Stop. F.Stop is the platform that was founded by three photographers in 2008 by Devang, Ashit, and myself. Uh, so we came together in 2008 and thought of starting a platform that could get photographers on one platform and help the younger and aspiring photographers take away a lot of learnings from these legends, as we would call them. And as a part of the lockdown series, we've had such a wonderful response to the series that we started 2 weeks back. Today, we have none other than Saumya Khandelwal speaking at top. Thank you once again. And Raj Lalwani will be moderating. Before that, I'll just request Devang to share a small video on F.Stop. Thank you, Devang. I'll hand over the stage to Raj to take things forward from here.
Thank you, Vinay, and welcome to everyone. Hi, everyone. I'm delighted to be moderating a session for Saumya Khandelwal today, who not only happens to be a very good friend, but is also one of those rare photographers whose work immediately struck me for its extreme sensitivity, because she works in a space uh, in the world of photojournalism and documentary photography, which where the impact of a photograph is always considered most important. And when we think of impact, we tend to think of a photograph that is, say, extremely dramatic. I dare say loud in volume. But a lot of Saumya's work has almost always struck me for how remarkably sensitively it deals with a lot of subjects that could otherwise be sensationalized, and that's something that I've always admired her for. Saumya, over to you.
Thank you so much, Raj. Really appreciate that introduction. Let me first start with saying that uh, I'm really pleased to be here sitting in this panel here today. Every day before the talk would start and all the panelists would kind of get together, I would quietly log in and perch myself in a corner without saying a hi to anyone because I'd be so intimidated by the presence of everyone. They're all photographers whose work I've looked up to, and I'm extremely pleased to be talking in front of them today. Also, thank you, Raj, for agreeing to moderate this because Raj has been one of the very few people who's seen my work evolve over time, right from the first project that I worked on. Uh, I'll tell you a little about where I started and where things probably began. Very recently, I discovered that my great grandfather, before manufacturing ink, was actually a professional photographer. He had a brief stint in Gorakhpur, before which but it did not work financially for him. So he had to sell off everything and he came to Lucknow. My grandfather followed the family tradition forward. He sold a lot of things. We're a business family. But in his lifetime, he owned at least 5 cameras, including still and video cameras, and all for documenting memories. My father didn't have any inclination towards photography, but I do remember that when I was growing up, I always had these beautiful photographs of me and my family to look at. And as a kid, when I was in school, I just look at myself from my childhood days. And I would keep looking at those photographs and just imagine how it was to be in that time with those people around family. So I think in a lot of ways, photography was constantly speaking with me. But never did I think, or anyone in my family think, that I would go ahead to do this. I did commerce, and then I went on to do a bachelor's in business administration. While doing that, I was kind of getting convinced this is not the life that I want for myself. But the nail in the coffin was this one class that I attended, which was for preparation for MBA, where the teacher wrote down a lot of zeros on the blackboard. And he asked, a typical MBA class, and he asked, does this have any value? And everyone's like, no, sir. And then he put a one in front of that and he asked, does it have any value now? And everyone's like, yes, sir. And he said, who wants that salary? Everyone's hands went up and mine didn't. And then he said that if you want this salary, you'll probably have to wake up at 3 a.m. in the morning. You'll probably be flying business class and you'll probably be staying in the fanciest of hotels, but you'll be slogging your asses off and you'll probably be working 14 hours a day. And I thought to myself, is this the life that I really want? And I knew that, I wasn't the kind of person who could do things solely for money. So, in the rashness of the 20-year-old, I told my parents that this is not what I want to do. And around the time when I was doing my bachelor's in business administration, I had friends in journalism who had. Can you hear me now?
Can we mute all mics, please?
We request everybody to keep the mics on mute and your videos off. We are seeing a lot of participants with their videos on. Nobody except the panelists, we request, should start their videos and their mics. Yeah, sorry for that, Saumya. You can go.
No. Uh, where was I?
You told your father that that's not the life you
Right.
want.
Yeah, so I decided that this is not what I want to do in life. But while I was also doing a bachelor's in business administration, I had friends in journalism who had photography as a course. So I would kind of go out with them on shoots sometime. I had a compact Sony camera, which I would use. So in the rashness of a 20-year-old, I told my father that photography it is, and that is what I want to do. My parents eventually conceded. I applied for various colleges and I made it to Jamia. I did a 1-year course there. And when I came out, I realized that photography is not like other industries. You don't get a job or you don't get work just because you have a degree. And you've come from a different city, you're trying to find your space, and you're trying to, that you need to make money and you need to be paying your bills, and you also think that there's so many things you wanted to do and you're here to do, which which were not turning out like I'd imagined. I started working on some curation projects. I assisted Mr. Prashant Panjir on a curation project, and I did a couple of other curation projects as well. But somewhere I was very nervous about the fact that I wasn't doing what I'd set off to do at the first place. I wasn't doing photography. The little photography that I was doing by myself was pretty directionless. You don't know what you're doing is right or not, or if it's taking you anywhere at all. And I was at quite a low in terms of what should I do with things. I was kind of going to make up my mind that probably this is not what is meant for me, and I should probably go back home and explore other options in life. Then in about December 2012, I attended a talk, and I attended a talk by this photographer who was showing a body of work, which, and I give this scope to a lot of things in life. I know something when it's good, with even if I don't understand it completely, but when you see it, that it's amazing and it's very powerful. And it was one of those works, and the photographer spoke about failures, and the photographer spoke about being at his lowest before he rose up and before he produced that body of work. That photographer was Amit Mehra sir. He was that was the place where his talk really appealed to me. And I told myself that probably I should give myself time and I should give myself a chance. I was very fortunate that he agreed. He called me to see my work, and he said that I should be shooting more. That was also the time when he had just had a daughter. She was pretty young, and he was kind of juggling between a lot of things. And I was hoping that I could get some more advice from him. And then one day I was constantly trying to reach out to him to see if, I could show him my work, if I could understand where should I head with it. And then one day he called me and he said that, I'm going somewhere and I will be, it's a little far. I would have about half an hour to converse with you. If you want, you can meet me somewhere on the way and we can chat while I'm driving and while I'm doing my work. I was like, sure, let's do that. And we had this conversation there where he heard everything that I had to say, and then he said, let's do one thing. Give yourself 6 months time and give that time to your photography. Don't burden your photography with the burden of money, and I will guide you while you're doing all of this. And then in those 6 months, if you still think that photography is not what you want to do, then why don't you just go back and decide what are the other options? But if you do go back without giving this try at photography, then probably this is a regret that you'll hold for the rest of your life. And in the larger context of life, probably this 6 months will be pretty inconsequential. And so I was convinced, and I was convinced that I wanted to give this try at photography. I started my first project. It was, you could almost say that it was an assigned project. That's when I started working along the Yamuna and along issues of water, which is the first body of work that I'm going to be showing to you. Vinay, can you enable my screen sharing, please?
Just give me a second.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I started walking around Yamuna in those days, and this was my first documentary project that I was working on. In a lot of ways, it was very reflective because it would give me a lot of time to just walk around and to observe how life was being nurtured around the water body. I loved the idea that there is this entire civilization that would come and settle around water bodies and kind of intertwine it in everything, in religion and your daily practices. And there's also always something that was happening along the banks. But what also really struck me was the callousness with which we treated the same source of life. I went to the Mahakumbh and I was amazed in the explorations of a young 20, 21-year-old. I was amazed at how much people believed and how much faith that people had in water as a source of life and its aspects of spirituality, and yet that was the very source that they were treating very callously. I moved on to work on the project looking at aspects of commodification of water and scarcity of water. And the next few images will is where you'll see that. Uh, so after a long time, one day, Amit sir asked me, "So what do you think? Do you still want to do photography?" And I was like, "Of course I want to do that. Why do you ask?" And he said, "6 months have already passed since we spoke about it," and that's how this thing started. I knew that photography is what I wanted to do. Only I did not know how I would be earning out of it. And in some months' time, I started interning with Hindustan Times. I interned with them for a couple of months before they hired me, and I started working as a photographer with them. But the thing with photojournalism is that when you're setting off to do photojournalism, somewhere you think you're going to change things. It's only a matter of time that you realize that a bulk of the work that you do will probably not change anything at all. And also, when we're starting, we feel like we'll be doing very important stories. But almost for the first 1 year, all that I shot was weather assignments, broken roads, drains, clogged roads, and protests, and all the mundane things which never echoed with what my ideas of photojournalism were. But I clung along, and a lot of people around, including Amit sir, had a lot to do with kind of convincing me to take up my own projects and to be concentrating more on the stories that I wanted to do. But also in that entire space, it was very interesting that in every 6 months or 8 months, you'd come across one story where you'd feel like this is what I started doing photojournalism for. And that was the kind of work which really made me felt alive, and which really made me feel that what I'm doing is right. My only apprehension there would be that I wanted to spend more times in these stories, and I thought that these stories could be uh, conveyed in way better ways than time would allow in the limited space of photojournalism. And I always had this itch of going back to a lot of places and a lot of people that I'd photographed. So in 2015, I was having a conversation with one of my colleagues at HT, and we came across a piece of literature which spoke about these uh, very harrowing statistics about child marriage and about infant mortality in this area in Uttar Pradesh called Shravasti, which is about a little more than 100 kilometers from my hometown in Lucknow. And I was very surprised to see it. One, because it was happening so close home. And second, because when you talk about child marriage, all that you know of, you know that child marriage is rampant in Rajasthan, you know that it's happening in Assam and a lot of part of the other countries. But very little was actually coming out of Uttar Pradesh and this part that was being spoken about, which is why I also had my apprehension of what I was seeing, and the statistics that I was seeing was actually true or not. And one of the times when I was visiting home for a vacation, I decided to take a detour and go see for myself what was happening. And when I went there, I realized that all the statistics were really true, only it wasn't reported on. And so I decided that I wanted to be coming back to these places, because in a lot of ways, uh, these stories is what I wanted to talk about, and these were the kind of stories and the girls that I were meeting. They had very moving stories. They weren't the kind of people who had the option of education, who had the option of dreams in their lives. So I'm going to start with showing this work. Nirma is 16 years old. She's married, and she's one of the very few girls who is actually still studying after being married. But what Nirma actually wanted to do was to be a doctor. Only she did not know that in order to be a doctor, she needed to take science. So she was doing, she had arts, which is why she could not pursue it any further. Pooja is 14 and she's also married. Suvan is 12 years old. When I met her, she was actually chopping some logs of wood in the forest right behind her village. The village that she lives in, almost every girl who's reached adolescence is married. So we're talking about a village which is really backward. Suman did not know that she was getting married until the day of the actual ceremonies. So when haldi was applied on her hands, that's when Suman realized that all the celebration and all the preparations were indeed happening for her. And we talk about an area where 1 in 4 girls gets married before the age of 18. So the scale of child marriage is pretty rampant, but when it comes to reporting it as a crime, there were only 4 cases reported in 2017. So clearly there was a major gap in, the reporting and people's awareness and what was happening on the ground. Muskan's 14 years old when I met her for the first time. She's getting married to this boy called Raju, who is 21. When Muskan was told that she's getting married, a couple of months later, her school was discontinued because her father thought it wasn't appropriate for a girl to be going to school after she was married. And when I met Muskan, she was this girl who was behaving very responsible. She was attending to all the guests there. She was meeting all the people there, and and there were also these quiet moments there. So when I spoke to her and I tried to have a conversation with her about what she's really feeling and does she think about all of this that's happening around her, so Muskan said, "अरे दीदी इसमें महसूस क्या करना है ये तो होता ही है सबके साथ." For the interest of everyone, she said, what's to think or feel about it? It happens with everyone. So I think it was really important for me. The sentence is also very important for me to realize the fact that you're actually talking to a set of girls who do not have any dreams, who don't know that they can be entitled to dreams. And while these ceremonies were happening, there were feuds between the family related to dowry. And in the middle of that, the couple was also conversing and trying to have their own relationship and trying to stay away from everything that was happening around them. Raju is a school teacher now. He is one of the boys who's really interested in studying, and he is obviously able to continue his education even after marriage. In these parts of the country, a girl does not live with the husband right after marriage. So I was also interested to know if they're just getting married, and if they're not starting to live with the husband, does that really qualify for a marriage, and does that really change anything? And I realized that it does, because when the girl gets married, her education is discontinued and she enters into a sort of a preschool of marriage. So she would take care of everything at home. She would be the one who would be cooking all the meals, taking care of all the house chores, taking care of everybody at home. So the images before this were from her wedding, and then I met her a couple of times in between, and then I met her finally on the day of the Gona. Somewhere in my mind, I think I wasn't prepared for what I was going to see. I expected to see a grown up Aarti just because she was having her Gona. In my mind, it did not register that she was still that same girl. So when I met her for a second, I was kind of taken aback because I realized nothing has changed. She's still the little girl that I left last time, and this time I had met her about 8 months later, and nothing much had really changed. And that entire process of being with her through the Gona turned out to be very difficult, because when Muskan left her home, I was the only woman that left with her. There were a lot of men, but I was the only woman. And for her, here she's en route to her husband's house, and she's looking at the road ahead in a lot of apprehension and fear. And uh, this is uh, this is where I think it became very important for both of us to be there for each other in a lot of ways, because when Aarti did reach her husband's house, uh, more than her own fears, she was also kind of clinging on to me as an anchor, because I was the only familiar face around her. These tattoos that you see in the hands of these two girls signify their marital status. So, in some communities, if the girls do not have these tattoos, the in laws would not even accept them in the house. So, it's sort of a branding that happens. This is Muskan at her husband's house. So when she entered, she was made to sit in this empty room by herself for a couple of hours. People were kind of coming in and checking on her, serving her meal, but she was just sitting by herself. And in the middle of all of that fear, chaos, sorry, I could hear my own voice. In the middle of all that apprehension, she was still checking on me. And I was really moved by the strength of character for someone who was in this situation in a new house completely, who did not know what's lying ahead of her. The fact that she still had the strength to think about others and to take care of it was really humbled me in a lot of ways. Next day in the morning at 4 o'clock, Muskan was awake. She took a shower to be ready to cook the first meal of the day. What this entire episode did do to both Muskan and me was that it brought us together in some weird ways, because even while I came back, it was constantly important for both me and for her to know how the other was. And uh, we all know what the realities are on the ground. And there was this phase when I would really be in touch with her a lot, because I would just have all these thoughts of what is the worst that could happen to her, and and how bad could it be for her, because at the end of the day she was just a teenager. uh, there's a 21-year-old lady who's pregnant with a second child, and that's Rima Devi. She's 17, and she's holding her second child in her arms. Uh, so the child bride's work is something that is still ongoing. I'm still, I go and see Muskan off and on, and we stay in touch, and I still go and photograph her. Over a period of time, it's become more about just hanging out with her as well and her family. So a lot of times I'm just there. I'm not even, my camera might just be there, but I'm not even photographing, but we're hanging around. They want to know about my life, and I want to know about their life. And I think while I was doing all the works that I was doing, as part of my personal projects, and also with all the work that I was doing for the various publications that I was shooting, I started noticing some repeated patterns in my works. I realized I photographed women a lot. They were, whenever I'd go out on stories, and even if they weren't about women, I would end up photographing them a lot. And so I thought I'll just put together some photographs to share about the various women that I've met while I've been doing so many stories. This is one of my first projects in Hindustan Times where I was like, this is what I do photojournalism for. This is in Chhattisgarh, and we'd gone to do a story about a woman platoon that was deployed in a conflict area for a longer period of time for the first time in the history of this country. This was in Chhattisgarh, and I met these amazing women who would. So it was very interesting, because you're talking about all these women, and you're talking about the government and the forces trying to say and put out the word that they're these very powerful women, but there's also this caution with which the security forces would push them forward. And despite the fact that, like, so they were doing a drill of guns while we were there, and they were shooting, and we went to a shooting range to photograph that. And the sub inspector came and told me, she's like, thank God you brought us here, otherwise we haven't shot a gun even once in the past 1 year. So you're actually talking about a lot of women, and obviously a lot of people trying to do a lot of it about pushing them forward, but also a lot of times when you just realize there's probably more belief and faith that everybody needs to place in them. And in the middle of it, what I really enjoy about all these women that I'm photographing is the fact that they never stop being women, and the fact that there's always that uh, there's that sensitivity and vulnerability which I find very endearing, and which in a lot of ways I think is also is also responsible for a lot of resilience that they show. And that's the CRPF, but it's really endearing to see them sleeping with a doll every night. So they have a doll that they keep with them. Uh, Later in my days in HT, when Irom Sharmila decided to end her hunger strike, which was on 9th of August 2016, I was there to do a story, rather a profile of Irom Sharmila. And it was very interesting, because I was practically there to do a profile, but because I was there, I thought I might as well photograph all the drama that was happening around her. And I was at the court when, she went to say that she will not be continuing her hunger strike anymore. And then when she came out to speak with the media, and then a lot of us would come from a lot of us media which had come from outside, we went back to our places, and suddenly she announced that she would be breaking her fast, and I missed the photograph. So I was there and I really wanted to do it. It wasn't a part of the story that I was there to do, but I really wanted to do it and I had missed it. And my boss at that point of time, Gurinder Rosan. So Guri sir called me and he's like, "Are you there?" I said, "Sir, I'm not." And then the amazing thing with the people who believed in my work is that, they really push me and they really believe in the work that I do. And he said, "I'm feeling really bad." I said, "I'm really sorry." So he's like, "No, I'm feeling really bad for you because you wanted to do it so much and, it didn't happen." But what it did do was, then I wanted to be sure that there was nothing else that I'd miss henceforth. And uh, we were supposed to have, I was working with a reporter who was a local there. And we were supposed to be doing a profile with Irom Sharmila. But because there was so much of news, each one of us got just about 15 minutes with Irom. And I realized that 15 minutes is not enough for doing what I wanted to do. So I convinced one of the TV guys to let me in, let me go with him. I realized that I wouldn't be a competition with him and probably he would not mind. So right now I'm inside with the TV guys. The hand that you see on the bottom right is a hand holding the mic. And what really moved me about this lady and about a lot of women that I've met was, you talking about the Iron Lady of Manipur. What you would imagine is a very strong-headed person, is a person who's in a lot of ways the definition of strong that we nurtured and conditioned to imagine. But what I saw in that lady was a lady who was easily moved to tears and a lady who was very vulnerable and very expressive. I eventually did go inside with the reporter, and we got just about 15 minutes. I did not know that the reporter had invited other of his friends to be there as well. And I kind of always feel like when we're going as photographers to see other people and to meet other people, we're already an intrusion into their reality and into their space, which is why I do not like a lot of cameras to be pointed at people if it's a story that I'm doing personally, and if it can be avoided, I would rather that it's the fewest number of people who go there. But it was four of us because our driver also decided to come, and everyone was recording it on their phone. And I was very sure that it would affect the way I was going to photograph Rome. But I was very moved that this woman, when the reporter asked her, "What do you think? Do you think that the Satyagraha of Gandhi has failed in India?" She moved to tears. And I could not imagine that this woman, who's been giving exclusive interviews for the past 5 hours, could still move to tears every time she's been asked about the same thing. And I was really touched by the warmth and by the softness of this woman. What I also was really curious to notice was, so how do you define a person who's been inside one room for 16 years of her life? In my mind, you would describe her by that room. And I was very amazed to see that everything around the room were very personal things. There were notes from loved ones, there were sketches from children, there was a stack of books on one side, there were planters on the wall. And the room nowhere talked about the achievements of this woman. And which is how I chose to photograph Irom. These are some of the images that I made there. This lady is Maninder Kaur. She's a farmer in Patiala. Uh, Her husband, so she does a lot of things, but all that her husband does is to take care of the money. So Maninder really likes to work, and she'd go out on the farms and she'd take care of the farm single-handedly. She would take care of her home, her house chores, of the cattle at home, of her children, of cooking the meals. The husband would support her, but support her in the sense that he would not be mean to her, but he would also not help her in what she was doing. This woman was so excited to be doing things that she shared about how there is a political meet. And we were doing this story for the New York Times where we were speaking with women voters across the country to see what they wanted in this election. And this was the last election that we are talking about. So Maninder shared with me that there was a political meeting that was happening in the village, and she wanted to be a part of it because she was really very sure what are the things that she wants, and she's very sure that she wants people to be addressing them. But she said, as a woman, I wasn't allowed entry there. Maninder has a daughter uh, who rides a scooty and who travels for about 30 kilometers every day to take coachings so that she can eventually go to Canada and study there. Um, Last year, actually, no, earlier this year, I also photographed Arundhati Roy. And like a lot of women that I've met who've seen a lot and who've gone through a lot, there's this quality that really moved me about Arundhati, which was, again, uh, how vulnerable and how soft and how open she was as a person. And I see Raj smiling at that. So she spoke about a lot of things. We spoke about the politics of the nation. And the interview was also about her as a person. So we spoke about her family, her childhood, and everything. And we saw her visibly very at a loss of words when we asked her about her father. She did not know how to talk about it. It was clear that we touched a point that she probably hadn't addressed herself. Last year, I also worked on an assignment for National Geographic where we were looking at women's safety. The idea of the assignment was very interesting. The brief of the assignment was that when we're planning our cities, women's safety is not something that we innately consider. So it's not something that we prepare for, but it's most of a response uh, after things have been done. So we were trying to look at the initiatives that various people, organizations, and the government have taken in order to to ensure women's safety. Uh, I think this is a site which is very common in Delhi and which people don't even think about, but you just become conscious about it once. If you're a woman, is the fact that if you're walking on the street, people just think it's their right to stare at you, and you know, it's probably the most. Uh, I mean, if you pointed to them, they'd be like, "What's your problem?" I'm staring. Uh, so this is Tarannum Shaukat Ali. She is 28 years old and she works as a lady bouncer at a cafe. Taranum really thinks that there's a need for more women in this space because she thinks her role is very important. A lot of women, she says, when they get drunk, it's very uncomfortable for them if there are men handling them, and which is why it's really important that we're there to ensure that women can be here and they can enjoy themselves and they can still feel safe. Uh, so a lot of women would tell you whenever they're moving around in metros and in public spaces, there's a certain consciousness that we have about ourselves and our bodies when we are out there in public spaces. And my experiences have mostly been these when I'm, moving around a lot in northern part of this country, like this. But the fact that, you're constantly being gazed at, what I find very interesting is that if the same women are sitting in a women's compartment, they let themselves be, so that the patras would be somewhere and they wouldn't bother about it. They wouldn't care about taking out a mirror and a lipstick and just putting it on without a gaze. So I like the when I was trying to when I took this photograph, I was interested about the fact that there was this woman and she was surrounded by men, and a lot of times it can be intimidating. There's this group in Lucknow which is called Red Brigade. Uh, a lot of people in the group have themselves been subject to sexual abuse, and therefore they've come up with this NGO which teaches self-defense techniques to women across India, mostly girls in schools and colleges. The lady in center is Usha Vishwakarma, who's the founder of it, and she's this very bold lady uh, who's doing a lot of research about creating, rather incorporating women in the way history was told. Her observation is that when you talk about the history of India, the contribution of the women freedom fighters, or even the women, who've contributed in different fields, is rarely highlighted. So they're doing a lot of things, including these researches. Another thing that I photographed for the same story was Kerala Pink Police. The Kerala Police Department has incorporated a different force. It's called the Kerala Pink Police, with the idea that often when women are moving around street in public places, like I said before, that it can be intimidating to be around so much men. Having women as police and having them deployed around the city can make it sort of a safer space where they feel more comfortable to move around. I'll just share some works that I've done for various publications and also talk about the kind of, how it is to be doing these assignments in photojournalism. Uh, I was also commissioned by National Geographic to photograph His Holiness the Dalai Lama in the Tibetan community in McLeodganj. It was obviously amazing to meet His Holiness because he's such a warm guy, also very humorous. I was moving around in the monasteries and I was photographing monks, and uh, that there's this audience that His Holiness meets every day, so I was photographing them as well. It was very different than I'd imagined to be photographing His Holiness, because I'd seen all these references from works of Raghu Rai Saab, and I was like, wow, these are amazing images, and it's amazing. I'll probably get something good. And when I got there, I realized that the security scenario has changed completely in all these years. So I could not move around without having some security guard push me, even despite the fact that they knew what I was doing. But and His Holiness was pretty much okay with having me around. So even though we'd expected to have an entire day with him, we just got about a couple of hours, which included his time with with the audience and with the interview. But we tried to do the best that we could with that. We also looked around at a lot of. We went to TCV, which is a Tibetan Children's Village, where a lot of it's basically a free school for Tibetan children. They've now incorporated other students as well. But for a lot of students, this is the only family that they know while they're growing up. And I also got some brief moments with His Holiness while he was meditating. This was my first assignment with the New York Times, and I was thrilled that it made it to the first page. We'd done something around the rising temperatures in India. Uh, for the benefit of a lot of photographers who'd requested me to be talking about how photojournalism works, I'll also like to talk about a bit about how limited the deadlines are now. I hear a lot of photographers, a lot of senior photographers, and I hear stories of, even for National Geographic, with the number of days they have to pursue stories back then. But now things have changed substantially. So for a lot of stories that you'll be seeing that have been commissioned, I probably would just get a day or maximum 2 days to be doing everything that I have to do. I was also in Assam after the third list of NRC came out. We did this very interesting story in this village called Kho on the outskirts of Delhi, which had practically converted itself entirely into a migrant village because there were a lot of industries that were coming around, and all the people sold off their lands to the industries, and they converted the area that they had into these shelters, or these little living spaces for all the migrant workers. And because of the economic slowdown which is happening now, all these places were lying empty. This is one of my most recent stories that I did with the New York Times about how India's press is not as free anymore. NDTV is, I believe, a great example of level-headed reporting in these days when a lot of media houses can be very biased. We all know what's been happening around the country. 2020 has been a very difficult year for our country, and it began with a lot of political turmoil, and then it converted into this chaos all over the world with COVID coming in. So I started documenting the things that have been happening here after Jamia was attacked. Jamia is where I had studied, and when I moved around, first of all, the thing that affected me most was now this. All of the things that were happening were no more political, just political. Now the attacks were kind of going further, and education institutes were being attacked. And I think at the end of the day, a lot of media tried to do a lot of propaganda around it and tried to color it in a lot of ways. But I thought while I was being bothered by everything that was happening around the country, I was really bothered by the fact that the Education Institute had been brought into the middle of all of this. Just for the benefit of some people who might not know, there had been major protests against the National Register of Citizens and the Citizenship Amendment Bill, which is now an act, starting December last year. And a lot of people came out on the streets of Delhi and across the country to voice their dissent against it. It's a very political move, which has taken really ugly colors. Earlier this year, we also saw Delhi being affected, being rampaged rather, while Trump was visiting India. There were riots in parts of Delhi about 20 kilometers away from where Trump was. We moved around in the colonies, and we moved around in the places where the violence had struck, and there were buildings and there were mosques and there were there were places, houses being looted, and there were these buildings which were entirely burnt. People had lost their homes, they'd lost their livelihoods, and they'd lost all their savings. This gentleman is Muhammad Jamaluddin. He was a bakery owner, and he was attacked when, so he fled his house, and a couple of days later, he went back to check on his house if it was okay. When he went there, he was attacked by a man with a rod. His brother escaped, but he was hit. He was taken to the hospital, and 3 days later, he lost his life. This place where he is right now was actually a place which was sheltering a lot of Muslims at that point of time, because a lot of people had fled their homes. So while there's some people around him who directly related to him, there are a lot of people around who don't even know who he is. This is a masjid in Jamia, which had been vandalized on December 15 and which had been attacked with lathis and with tear gases by the Delhi police. Shehnat Bano is a native of Nehtor. This is where her house is. And one evening, the police barged into her house, they vandalized the house and took away her husband, Kamar. Shama Parveen, I'm sorry. This is Shehnat Bano. Earlier was Shama Parveen. Shehnat Bano is a victim of Delhi riots as well. And she fled the house. A couple of days later, when she came back, her house was like this. She'd lost all the savings that she'd had. They were just grateful that the family and everyone in the house was okay. And they were confident that they can still build up life as long as the family is together and as long as they're alive. This is the family of a 9-year-old boy, Sagir Ahmed. Sagir was out of his house. Nobody knew where he was until someone said that Sagir passed away. Sagir was basically, he died in a stampede that erupted after the protest broke out in Varanasi. Sagir's mother does not live with them, but he was brought up by his grandmother, who's sitting here in the center, and by other cousins and relatives in the family. In Nehtor, there were different versions of stories that everybody had to say, but the most consistent version that came out from a lot of people was one evening the cops came in. They put their own vehicle on fire. They barged into houses and took away people. And then on December 21st, people gathered in large numbers at Jama Masjid to protest against CA and NRC as well. They were joined by Bhim Army's chief, Chandrasekhar Azad, who read the Constitution of India to the people there. I would like to tell you that, there was actually a point when I had to move through this crowd. And believe me, when I was moving and I'd asked them for way, everybody was stepping aside to give me way. And I was amazed. I've been around and I've been photographing a lot. And I was amazed at how considerate and how much everyone was together in solidarity. For me, this photograph was pretty much the situation of what was trying to be achieved. For me, it was about these people who would probably be put inside detention centers. People had to take out flags to prove that they were indeed patriotic and they were indeed Indian. In the middle of this, a center of power that emerged was Shaheen Bagh, where a lot of women came together to protest peacefully against the state of affairs. They would spend their nights at the Shaheen Bagh, under the Shaheen Bagh tent itself, even on 31st December, which was among one of the coldest nights this year. And then there were places where protests were getting out of hand as well. And then the police had to retaliate also. This was one of the protests. It was happening at Delhi Gate. I think Surinder is in the audience here. And while photographing that, Surinder lost a tooth because a stone came and hit his mouth. A lot of us who were there knew that the crowd that we were photographing in the morning at Jam Masjid that I mentioned made way for me to move was different than the crowd that was here. And, the stone pelting began. The RAF tried to restrain for an hour before they water cannon the people. And then there was a car set on fire. This was also a very, so a lot of photographers were coming out to be photographing the protests that were happening across the countries, and a lot of them were young photographers. And I mean, honestly, like even when the Anna Hazare protest, a lot of photographers produced some amazing works, and probably they weren't really working with mainstream media, but they were just freelance photographers who were trying to document what was happening. And this is what was happening here as well. But what was really bothering was, as photographers, we get so swayed away by the events in front of us that we forget to think about our own lives. We think that the photographs are the most important thing for us to document. So while this car was burning, there were photographers all around the car. I mean, one photographer was actually as close as about 4 to 6 feet from the car, and I actually had to pull him away and tell him that the car could burst any moment, and this is not something that he should be doing. But it's also about the fact that our organizations, and especially Indian organizations, almost never give the security of photojournalists, and they never make it a priority. And there's a lot of risk that photographers undertake. International organizations that I've worked with are very cautious about it. I've undergone hostile environment trainings. But for a lot of professional photographers in India, they don't know what is the line that they should not cross or how far should they go for a photograph. This was Selampur, and I was photographing in Jamia when with Surender, who's in the audience here, and two photographers, Javed and Indranil, saw us photographing there, and they said, we're going to Selampur. Apparently, there have been stone pelting there. Do you want to come along? And we hopped into the car. We headed to Selampur, and when we entered there, we weren't prepared to see what we saw. It looked like we had entered Kashmir. The road was filled with stones. It was absolutely empty. And for a second, all of us looked at each other and we were like, this is not the Delhi we knew. This is something else. We went ahead to see what was happening, and tear gases were being fired. None of us had expected this to happen. So except for uh, the Reuters photographers, none of us were carrying gas masks, and we did not have any protection gear with us. I was just using uh, masks, the N95 mask, because in Delhi almost everyone carries them, and kind of I wetted it and I put it around my face, and everyone started sharing all the resources they had. Someone was lending mufflers and scarves to each other so that we could protect ourselves. This is DRP school, which was vandalized during the Delhi riots. I was there with a reporter, and uh, she'd been documenting and she'd been reporting on the riots ever since they started. But that day she broke down to tears. She's like, this is the worst of them all. If this is what they can do to a school, then I don't know where's the limit to what can happen. And at the end of the day, in situations like these, everyone loses. Like, like a lot of media spoke about this as a Hindu school, and being intruded into via the next school, which belonged to a Muslim owner. But the point was, in a situation like this, the only winners probably are just the politicians. Everyone just pays a price for their politics. This is a Jamia. When I went to Jamia on 16th of December, I wasn't prepared to see what I saw there, and that's happened multiple times over the course of the past few months. I realized that at the end of the day, it's just become about the skull caps, and it's just become everything's become too political and too divided and too communal. And this is not how I'd imagined to revisit my college. And the politics did end up achieving what it had set out to achieve. It did divide the nation in ways we would not like to have seen. She's Ram Sakhi. She's mourning the death of a 26-year-old son, Rahul Solanki. He'd stepped out to get some groceries, and he was caught in the crossfire, and he was shot at, and he lost his life. That's Zahid Hussain, 55, who's mourning the death of his son, Mohammad Suleiman Malik, who was 20 years old. Suleiman was a really good kid. I visited his home, and he was a civil services aspirant. He wanted to serve his country, and he wanted to either be an IAS officer, or he wanted to be just involved with doing good for the country. He was out for the Friday prayers, and when he was returning, he was caught up in the protest, and the police fired, and the bullet hit him. That is all from my side. Thank you.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, we can.
Hi. Okay, thank you so much, Saumya. I think in a time of falsehoods, it's work like this. It's journalism and real journalism, not what passes off as journalism a lot nowadays. It's photojournalism and journalism that pretty much makes up the history of tomorrow. And in that sense, you've done some fantastic work. I really admire how I think a lot of people in the comments are talking about how powerful these photographs are. And yet, there is almost always, as I said earlier as well, such an element of vulnerability. And it takes great strength to be that vulnerable and to be that open to vulnerability. And I want to congratulate you for that. There are a lot of questions from the audience. I want to ask two or three questions of my own before I move to the audience and then I move to the panelists. Okay, so Soumya, the header of your website, not on its landing page, but when searches for your name, says woman photojournalist. Now, at one level, there is a stream of thought that would say that it should be the photography that must be at the forefront rather than gender or any other identities. And yet, you briefly touched upon this, of course, the fact that you're a woman in an industry where the gender ratios are completely skewed and which is filled with sexism on several different levels. It has surely shaped your journey in several ways. So, what are the challenges that you think you faced because of this? And what are the opportunities that you think it's brought? Like, at one level, do you think that some of these stories and the kind of gaze you cast is possible or at least easier because you're a woman? And are there stories that you were kept out of because of your gender?
Thanks for asking that question, Raj. Very early in my career, I became conscious that the fact that I'm a woman would play a lot of role in the kind of works that I'd be doing. In the beginning, when I'd be called a woman photographer, it would bother me because it seemed like it was condescending, you know. A lot of my colleagues would tell me, "Oh, you're being given these stories because they're soft stories. They're not sending you there because you're a woman, so they're not sending you on hard stories." But also hard stories and hard news, in fact, was not something that really appealed to me. I was really interested in telling the softer stories, and I was really interested in exploring people through those stories. And gradually, over a period of time, I realized that I fortunately had people like Gurinder Rosan, my boss in HT, my editor in chief, Bobby Ghosh, who I think is also in the audience here today, who kind of started identifying me for this niche that I had. And, I would be just sitting, we had an open newsroom. So, everybody would be sitting at the same space. I would hear boss and other people discussing that there's a story and we need to assign a photographer to it. And then, especially if it's got something to do with women. And I'd smile to myself because I'd be like, this is coming to me now. And while the other people were not interested in doing it, I started seeing that as an opportunity. And I was like, this is working great for me because these are the kind of stories that I'm doing. So in a way, it was, what wasn't working me at the first instance. I think I started finding joy in that very niche. And I think now I feel really like when people call me a woman photographer, I kind of feel happy about it because I know that there's a certain sensitivity that I can bring to my work, and there's a certain approach that I can have, which I really am grateful for. Having said that, the challenges are real, and in a lot of ways, the industry reflects our society. And like I've been sat down on the field and I've been told that women should not be in photojournalism because you get married, you'll have kids, and you'll probably have you know your husband to take care of. How will you continue as a photographer? All those things are real. Whenever there are hard stories, uh, people would just be like, it's very hard for you to do it. But I think the way it eventually changed for me was that I started finding the opportunities and started seeing what was the way that I could come out of it, which has really helped me, in finding my own niche. And like I said, initially when I was doing projects, I wasn't really heading out to find stories related to gender. But then as I started exploring stories, I started looking at the gender aspect in all the stories that I was doing, and it became very important to me.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so now you work for a newspaper, you work for an agency, and over the past couple of years or so, I guess, you've been working freelance, especially for a lot of international organizations. Can you tell us, especially for young aspiring photojournalists, what have been the differences between these three experiences, both in terms of the way they look at photography, the way they look at the photojournalistic image, uh, and in terms of the kind of learnings and experiences you've had as an employee? I have a second part to this question. I would like you to dwell on how you deal with the biases that each of these bring. Like even Swapan mentioned the other day, the one thing that can be extremely challenging while working for international media is that the West tends to look at India in a certain way. Everything is retrofitted into a certain narrative. And yet, here with our local media, we are under a fascist government where most organizations are towing the line and have become propagandist mouthpieces of the government machinery. So, how do you deal with the biases that each of these kinds of organizations bring?
Right. Can we do one question at a time? So can
Sure.
Excuse me,
Yeah. Yeah.
Soumya, can you a bit louder, please?
okay, sorry. Is
Okay.
this better?
So
Yeah, this is much better.
this is not better. Okay. So now, in terms of how these three different experiences look at the photojournalistic image differently.
Right. Uh, so we have to understand that in the Indian context, and I've faced it a lot, the kind of visual literacy that we have in the publication space is very limited. You know, I was fortunate to be working at a time when we had someone like Bobby who was coming in from Time magazine and who understood imagery and who was really putting a lot of emphasis on it. But the process of, so the process is very important uh, to understand why is a certain kind of imagery is coming out at the final output. Okay. So as a photographer, when I'm going out to shoot, I'm filing a couple of images which go out in the system. Then there are editors and designers who's sitting on the desk to design those pages. Those editors do not have a visual knowledge, right? They do not have visual literacy, but those are also the people who are selecting the image that goes there. And in a lot of ways, the image that would end up there would be very illustrative. This is what happened, you know? Like uh, Dinesh Krishnan, when he was working at HT, he was one of those guys who would just go and say that this is a good image and this is what you put there. If you don't want to put this, then I don't have any other image for you, right? Over a period of time, we kind of cultivated our friendship with the people on the desk as well. And, we just go there and tell them, you should put this image. And they're like, no, we don't think so. And we'd be like, we think you should. And we'd kind of uh, insist and, on pally terms, we'd kind of give in. So that's one bit. When it comes to agencies, the process is very different. At the time when I was working at an agency, my images were being siphoned via a photo editor before it reached the wire. In a lot of places, that's not the case anymore. Photographers can file the photos directly. But also, agencies have a certain style. Okay. And a lot of times when you join them as photographers, they would look for their style in your work,
Hmm.
right? It only takes a couple of years before you are able to find your own style in that broader space of the agency style, which is why you'll see a different set of images there. And that too is kind of influenced by things like how would the world see the country, see what's happening in India.
Hmm.
With international publications, I think there is more scope in terms of what you can do with the imagery, because in general, the kind of emphasis that they put on photographs is much higher. So they would be really, inclined to get better talents for their works. And also the fact that they're working with freelancers changes a lot of things. The fact that someone like the New York Times does not have staffers gives them the space to experiment with a lot more styles and not be restricted by that small pool of photographers that they have,
Hmm.
right? So which is why at the end and after that, so the process that someone like an international publication would follow is, while the photo editor is assigning me on the story is coming to the photo editor, and it's the photo editor who is deciding what images go there, which is why the level of visual literacy you expect to happen is slightly higher. You still have to give into account that the photo editor is probably sitting in another country, and he's probably dealing with 30, 40 different countries. And therefore, there's only so much that he would know about a given country, right? And that would affect his choice of images, or her choice of images.
Right.
But broadly, photographically, that's the difference that exists in between the three spaces.
Okay. Okay.
What was the second part of the question again, please?
The second question is that look, as a photographer, as a photojournalist, obviously you are in the moment, and there is a certain amount of objectivity that is attached to what you shoot. But in terms of how images are chosen, there are obviously biases when it comes to all three. International publications tend to look at India in a certain way. Everything is retrofitted into a certain narrative. And with our local media, a majority of our local media are propagandist mouthpieces of the government machinery today. And not just today, even in previous governments.
Yeah. Uh, so, sorry, you want to know about the biases that the different publications have
How
to
do
come?
you as a
Yeah.
photographer deal with them? Yeah.
Sure. I think one thing that you realize very early when you're working as a photographer is that there's only so much control that you can have over your photographs, which is a problem. And I'm telling you, Raj, I've worked in a newspaper and I've seen such horrific things happen to my photographs that even when I started working with international publications, I somewhere carried the same burden with me. It took a little time to unburden myself with that. But now that I'm a freelancer and I'm working with publications, my solace is that I can choose to be on the side of things. There is some amount of control that I could probably have in terms of what assignments I'm picking and what assignments that I'm not picking.
Mhm.
But I also think that my job as a photojournalist is to document. Like when I was photographing the CA protest, there was a point of time when there was all this chaos that was happening, and a photo editor, who I thought was kind of softer on one side, requested me for a certain kind of images. And my first instinct was, hey, but that's not true. It took me a little time to realize that my job is to document everything that's happening, not to filter what I see, you know and I think that's a learning, and that's a conflict that happens with me it happens with me constantly, and especially in times when especially in a time like this, when you're in a situation where the country is so affected by things, and I think it's very natural for everyone to have their political opinions, which is why I keep having conversations about it with people to remind myself on what my job is. I had that conversation with Amit, so I had that conversation with Adnan at Reuters, and I had that conversation with Laurel, who was photographing the protest in Hong Kong, and everyone everyone would reinsure me that and remind me that my job was to be documenting things and not to be filtering according to my own biases.
Okay, lovely. Can we move to Kajol Rustagi? Vinay, can we move to Kajol Rustagi? She has a very interesting question.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, she's online. Yeah, Kajol, you can go ahead.
Yeah, hi Saumya.
I don't see. Oh, yeah, hi Kajal.
Actually, I really like your work and I've been following your work since a long time.
Sound.
Hello?
Audio is weak.
Can you come closer, please?
Yeah, now can you hear me?
Yeah, that's good.
Bit louder.
Yeah. So I just wanted to ask that I'm working as a journalist with the Indian Express, but since I'm a desk reporter, like I don't really go out to shoot and click. I want to do photojournalism only, and I entered journalism because I wanted to become a photojournalist. But over the past few years, I'm told there are hardly any vacancies and there is nothing, and the situation is pretty bad. So how should I go about it? Because even at here, even at the Indian Express, they say that you have to do your regular work, and then only when you have time, then you can go out and shoot.
I think the realities of the industry are pretty scary right now in terms of, a lot of people are having to see salary cuts and all of that. Uh, but the fact that you're already a desk reporter, Kajol, I do see uh, an opportunity in that, because we're living in times, and I'm sure it's going to move in that direction even more in the coming years, where you cannot just be doing one job. As a photographer, there have been so many times when my photo editors have asked me, do you also shoot videos, do you also write? And like, that's so common. So I think if you want to move towards photojournalism, and if you do get chance to be stepping out and to be shooting, and maybe in your own free time to be photographing, you should absolutely go and do that. And you should also think of this as a preparation period, where you kind of nurturing both your interests before you actually come out with a body of work. So it's going to be good to have a plan of action as to in which direction you would want to see your photojournalism go, and work in that direction, attempt stories like that already, and then kind of go forward and do that. And also, to add to that, you should also know that if you're doing both the things, if you're getting hired, you'll be paid a better rate. So it's an advantage.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, can we move to Kashish Badar? Vinay, can you bring Kashish
Yeah.
online?
Yeah, Raj, she's online.
Hey, hi,
Yes.
Saumya.
Hi, I don't see you, Kashish.
Can you see me now?
Yes. Hi.
Hey, it was a really enriching conversation you had here. I just had one question that, what's your pre-shoot planning like? And what all goes into the research? And how do you finally zero down on a project? I'd like to know that, know more of that journey.
Sure. I think for the research on a project, and for the way that we pick up stories, one process that I really enjoy, which I'm not able to do as much in these times, is reading a newspaper, because we can't have newspapers coming home because they might be carriers of the virus.
Mm.
But the fact that you can read news that is not told to you in order of importance, and that you have everything around up. What I find interesting is that when you go through these stories, like, so I'm trained as a photographer, I'm not trained as a journalist. So journalism is something that I've acquired over time, looking at my colleagues who I've worked with, reading stories like, uh, I mean, I always used to wish if I could work for Indian Express, because I'd heard so many stories about their journalism and about how they do it. So I would read a lot of their big story sections to understand how they go around the process. And a lot of times when you're reading these stories, you see these points which you think can be explored further, right? So it could probably be, uh, let's say it's a story about COVID, and they talk. For example, what's happening in Uttar Pradesh is that prisoners are being released on personal bonds, and because they want to ensure social distancing, and they want to ensure that they don't get infected. I think that's a great story to pursue. Get into prisoner home, I would be thrilled. So I think the stories that am looking out for are very human interest stories, which at some level appeal to me. Once that groundwork is done, that's when I kind of look at a lot of other resources related to that, and try to research deeper, kind of see if I can find any people in those areas, or if I can connect with other journalists who I know in those areas, and see what's happening on ground with respect to that. It really helps if you can find people on the ground working in those places, to be able to decide how do you want to take things further. Did I answer your question properly?
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
But I also want to understand, how do you zero down on a project? So I work as a documentary filmmaker, okay,
Hmm.
and I also do a lot of commissioned projects. But the challenge I face, I'm also interested in photography.
Hmm. I've lost you,
Kashish, I'm sorry, I think
Kashish.
we've
So
lost.
many elements.
Right.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah, we
Yeah.
can.
So I said, yeah, okay. So how do you zero down on a project when so many elements
I think what I'm looking for, Kashish, is the longevity of the
with
project
you?
in sense. Sorry, I missed
Mm.
your.
No,
Yeah,
no, it's okay. It's okay.
yeah.
Carry on.
Yeah, I'm saying what I look for is the longevity of the project in terms of what is the scope of growing. What's the scope of storytelling in the project? Like the prisoner story it's a very small story. It's not a story that I can do over a longer period of time. But for example, with something like child rights, there are so many things and so many aspects to explore about it. If you go read the literature of even if you go through the statistics of the government on health and everything, you realize that there's so many related aspects to that. There's the aspect of maternal health. There's the aspect of maybe female infanticide there. So what I look for is what's the depth of the project and what are the various things that I can explore within it.
Okay, lovely. Thank you for your questions, Kashish. I believe Baman wants to come in at this point. Baman?
Hi, Saumya.
Hello, sir.
How are you doing, Saumya?
I'm good, sir. Thank you so much. How are you doing?
Yeah, thank you very, very much, Saumya. I think that you talk about female journalists and female photographers and male photographers, and you inspire a lot of young female photographers. But I think you also inspire a lot of young and old male photographers too. I just wanted to let you know. Having said that, there are two things. You speak so beautifully, Saumya. You speak so beautifully, so lucid, so sure-footed, and in a world where things are happening which aren't quite, scripted. It's so amazing how you go about getting those amazing images. What struck me most in the conversation, and I'm always also excited about the story and the person behind the photographs, apart from the photographs themselves per se, is it says your story on child brides, right? What amazes me is that you remember each and every child bride's name. You have a relationship. Not only do you remember the name, I don't think you've just put it in a diary. You've maintained a relationship. Somehow I know Muskan through you. Not only do you remember Muskan's name, you know her as a person. You've kept in touch with her. She means so much to you, and in many ways, I think you mean so much to her, because when she was in her maike, she was looking after you. So it's amazing how you remember all these names. But the one line that choked me up in all of this was one of the saddest photographs in your whole presentation. That was young Suleiman. Did I get the name right? Yeah. And his father standing there, and by itself as a photograph, it's so moving. And you said that's his son Suleiman got shot, and there he was under a pile of wood. And then that line struck me. I don't know if you met Suleiman, but you said he was such a good lad. He was such a good boy. That line moved me simply because you may have known Suleiman, I don't know, before he passed away or after he passed away, but you didn't just take the photograph and run away. You went back and you found out a lot more about Suleiman, and you honored the deceased. That makes you very special, Saumya. I think those are the lessons that I think young photographers should learn, to know that it's not a mercenary world out there. You don't just value the living, you value the dead, and even after the dead, you want to know about what that person was all about. That's all I can say. God bless
Thank
you.
you so much, sir. I really appreciate that. I think somewhere that photography works for me. Photography, for the sake of photography, is not an idea that I particularly relate to. For me, it's I have that thing to finding a purpose in everything, and I feel really grateful that I can tell these stories through photojournalism, and I can meet all these people and I can know them. And I think the only way I can absorb everything that's happening in front of me and do justice to it is by telling the stories and by sharing it to to so many people. Thank you so much, sir.
Mike, please.
Yes, please, sir.
Audio is not there, Baba.
We
Is
can
it
hear
better,
her.
sir?
Amit, it's only your audio.
Amit, are you using earphones? Because we can hear her really.
I don't know. Maybe my age factor.
I want to hear this.
Okay. Do we? So I have a bunch of other questions, but do we want to bring any of the other panelists in before I move to
Swapan has a
other
question.
questions by the audience?
Camera on,
Fazan wants to speak something.
Hey, please take away the camera from me. Hello.
Am I
Thank you.
audible?
Yes,
Yes,
Fazan,
yes.
and visible, Fazan.
Hi, Saumya. It always excites me to see young girls in doing a job which I always wanted my daughters to do. You're almost the age of my daughters. That really makes me happy. Okay, I have a little reservation on you calling the brides as child, because child, they have crossed the age of child and they're in the puberty years. And as far as I know, once a girl gets a period, that's the time they start looking for a boy and get married. So I have a little reservation on you calling them child. Would you agree on that?
When I say child brides, what I basically mean is all girls under the age of 18, which is how the law also describes it to be child marriage. So when I'm calling it child marriage, it's that definition that I'm sticking to.
Okay. Because I felt they were teenagers, so I thought it couldn't be a child, because what we saw Swapan's work and Vinay's work, they were like really child marriages. They were like 6, 7, 8 year types. So I just had a little reservation on calling them as child as such. Anyway,
Thank
I
you.
quite
But
like
in
your
a
work.
way, they are taking away their childhood now.
Okay.
I mean, 2 year here or there doesn't matter. The thing is, they are taking away their childhood. So it's okay.
And it's immoral and illegal. But okay, let's move on to the next question. I believe Swapan wanted to come in.
Yes, please.
Swapan and then Summer, and then we'll go back to the participants.
Hi, Saumya. Thank you so much
Hello,
for
sir.
sharing this. And
Open loud.
Amit, I am shouting. I think it's your.
It's soft. No, it's soft. It's soft.
Sorry.
Okay, now can you hear me?
Better,
Please.
better.
Okay. Thanks, Saumya, and it's wonderful you're sharing these images, and obviously they will be spoken about by everybody. I promise to keep my question under 500 words because it's supposed to be a norm here, it seems, since yesterday. So I'll try. The thing is, coming back to what Raj said, and I think he touched upon actually a question which I wanted to ask, and I just feel that nothing much has changed in the last 30, 40 years. You're living that dream, I would say, of being a photojournalist who's got published in New York Times or a Nat Geo, which would probably, for a person starting out in journalism school, that would be the dream. Why I'm saying nothing seems to have changed is, and your views on this is, still I feel somewhere, and I'm going to take the liberty of using the word we, because people who have practiced for international publications, there is this symbiotic existence that we become messengers of everything odd about our country, India. And it works well for the West because for them also these stories of oddity are widely seen. So somewhere that always stays as a dilemma that, hey, yes, I'm becoming this big shot international photographer is getting published, but the kind of stuff I'm getting published for is generally oddities out of these countries, as if this, there's nothing good in this country. There's no, that we are the biggest middle class, we have the burgeoning IT sector, we have great DJs over here who are playing internationally. Stories like that somehow get missed out. And I think stories which are visually fertile, and generally when I use the word visually fertile, I mean, those are areas of downtroddenness or areas of some kind of despair. And how do you deal with this? And because at some point of time, I'm sure it comes up because you'll be labeled as a concerned photographer in the garb of a concerned photographer. They would be dealing with stories which somehow are always oddities of the country. Because I think a concerned photographer can be very concerned about the middle class too, about the extreme, economic growth in the country, or whatever these stories may be. How do you deal with that kashmakash, I would say, and where do you see it going forward? Sorry, it crossed 500 words. I'm sorry.
Thank you so much for that question. I mean, I would like to honestly confess and tell everyone here that I do positive stories and I do good stories as well. It's just that people don't notice them enough,
No, international
Yeah,
media. I'm
yeah,
talking
international media as well. I do positive stories. But I think, and I've had this conversation with a lot of people. I've had this conversation with Amit sir. I've had this conversation with Bobby Ghosh as well. And I think we realize that the amount and the portrayal of India that is happening in the West has changed substantially. There are way more better stories coming out of India at this point of time in history than there were probably 30 years back. And I really like this, and I have to confess that a lot of things I'm saying are things that I've discussed with people and have appealed to me, and are thoughts that have stayed with me. And Bobby described this beautifully. He said, you're only a speck in this timeline. Your existence and non-existence does not matter, in the sense that you're giving yourself a lot of importance by saying that it is you who has to be the center of all the stories and all the representations that is happening. And somewhere I also feel like it happens a lot of times when people especially NRIs who are now staying in the US and everywhere, they try to me saying, hey, you always talk bad about India. And I'm like, hey, hang on, sitting in US, you don't tell me what's happening in India. You're sitting in US, you're telling me that for example, a report that I've come out about on CA and where my photographs have been used, you're telling me I'm using it to defame my country. I'm sorry. I mean, this is the news that if you choose not to see it, and if you decide that this is not something that is legit, I think that's not something that I'm concerned with. I think in these times it's more important than ever to be talking about these stories, because we're surrounded by a government and we're surrounded in times where voices are being hampered and where media is not being allowed to work freely. And which is why I think it's even more important for me to be talking about these stories, because till the time these stories are, I think it's very important to continue to report on them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Saumya, I have a question from Paramita Chatterjee, who has a very practical question. Can you just talk a bit about how you pitch a story to an editor? Any particular do's and don'ts?
The do's are keep it very crisp and short. And so it's, I mean, honestly, my pitch is not more than 3 paragraphs and 3 very short paragraphs with a list of visual opportunities that the story has.
Okay.
And I think the first paragraph would be about introducing the subject. The second para would be about more details. Then I would go on to talk about, the visuals, and probably I'll leave a line about what's the direction I'd like the story to take and how I'd like to, that's basically a concluding line about what the story would look like. So yeah.
Okay. Cool. Thank you. Samar, I believe you wanted to comment.
Yeah, I just had, two thoughts. What Swapan said, I think that's a very huge battle. Somebody like him who's got so much experience, and somebody like you who is working presently, this thing about that positive story or, non-positive stories. I think we also suffer from one thing is that, I would say, I mean, I'm sure you guys understand is, this whole colonial baggage. And, I lived in the US for many number of years, and I used to always look out for, during print time into New York Times. And the only time any story would come if there was, either a bomb blast or a bus fell off somewhere in the mountains. Nobody really cared about it otherwise. Today, you see a lot more going on there because of how the media has gone global. but we just don't fit into it, in so much of space, because the interest doesn't lie. And I think we should really stop bothering about what they think, but then going back to, for this wonderful work you shared, I'd like to comment is, do you think that a lot, work really reflects on the politics you believe, what you subscribe to? And I just don't mean right or left, but do you think that your work is really about understanding and connecting to issues because you have a larger belief, rather than just a delivery woman who's out there to take picture, or delivery man or whatever, any thought on that?
I think, I might have my beliefs about a lot of things, but one thing that's paramount for me is whenever I'm going to a new space and whenever I'm going out to document a story, I open myself completely to what I have in front of me. So I think the space where I always want my stories to come out from is the space of human emotions. It's the space how we connect to people. And that's where even if I came in as a disbeliever, I think a lot of times when I become human and when I let myself flow in the situation, I go back defeated in my own beliefs. So I think that's the space where I mostly work in. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah.
Thank you, Samar. Can we move to Parag Gopale after this and Jassi Oberoi after that? Parag?
Yeah.
Hi, Parag.
Yeah, Parag is ready. Yeah.
Hi,
yeah, Parag, you can start your question.
Yeah. So my question was with regard to the photograph and Shahnaaz Bano, if I am able to recollect their names right. How did you follow these subjects during time of chaos? And was this a commission project, or did you get access because you have the accreditation, and did you just decide to go there independently? And also, like, in a similar situation of riot, you mentioned that there are these do's and don'ts that you're formally trained for. How do you take care of these aspects, these practical aspects while working on a story which involves what could be a threatening situation?
Thank you for the question, Parag. So I started photographing everything that was happening in the country because at some place it really bothered me. And the only way I knew to address it was to document it, because I realized that this was my way of responding to it. So a lot of times when I was going out in the field, and because things were very volatile, like journalists were being attacked, and there were attempts by people to snatch away cameras as well. So we started following some basic ground rules. Like we would try not to be alone in any given situation. We would try about at least two of us, but a lot of times, like Surinder and me would hang out a lot of times Anushri and like Adnan and all these guys, whoever we'd find around, we'd try to move around together so that in case of any eventuality we can be there for each other. And a lot of times it could be a problem because these were times when because of media propaganda, things became very divided, and the first thing that people would ask is what media house that you are you from. And a lot of times people would judge you depending on your name, so you would get entry if you're a Hindu or if you're Muslim. So in these times, I think what was important was, one thing that we were trying to do was we were like Surinder had a press card which by an international organization. So we were basically trying to tell them that we're not from Indian media and that we're working with international publications, and that's the people that we usually report for. So they would kind of ease out about things, and then we would just like hang around and speak with them for a while, try to understand what they're doing, why they're doing. In the process, a lot of people start confiding things in you and start believing in what you're doing if you talk to them properly, and if you talk to them in a way that's more sensitive and that makes them believe in what you're doing. And I think just one thing leads to another. You don't, when you're setting out to do these things, you don't know what you'll get once when you're there. You just have to respond to everything that's happening there, and you just have to believe, and just keep in mind that you don't want to be doing any irrational things and things that might have repercussions for you. Because like a lot of people say all the time, that nothing is more important than your life. A photo is certainly not more important than your life. So these are some things that we keep in mind when we're stepping out.
Thank you, Saumya. Can we move to Jassi and then Sudhi Shivram? Jassi?
Yeah. So first of all, let me tell you, Saumya, that your images were really powerful, and they moved me. And people like me today is feeling that we are worthless photographers. We just don't do anything. We just shoot for ourselves and hardly creating any impact. What you are doing is something phenomenal. So really hats off to you. Now my question is that I've seen you said that you also document happy stories, but what we've seen is some really troubled times that you've shot, including the extreme things like Delhi riots as well. But the images that we have seen today, they portray a lot of silence and calmness in your images. So can you throw some light on that? What is going on in your mind while you are there, seeing the emotions flowing right in front of you? Does it impact you? And how do you control that and still bring out that serenity and calmness and silence in your images?
Thank you so much for your comments and for the question, Jesse. Uh, I think as a photojournalist, when in my early days when I'd be out photographing, and I was like just 1 or 2 months into the field, and I'd be photographing some politician, and they'd be up to the drama, and I'd keep looking at it and I'd laugh away, and I would forget that I also have to click a photograph, you know. But over time, I realized that I'm a photographer, and clicking a photograph is one of the first responses that I need to have to situations. So, as a photojournalist, you're taught to respond to situations with your camera. But I think what becomes very important for me, and I do it a lot of times, is a lot of times we're forced to photograph history, and honestly, we don't enjoy doing that. It's just not good to be seeing a lot of mystery in front of us, but we're photographers, and it's our job to do it. But my concern is always to be able to be respectful to other people. Like there have been situations when, there have been 4 or 5 photographers, we're all together, and there's this woman who's crying in front of us, and everyone is clicking. And there have been moments when I've kept my camera down. And because, usually I'm the only woman in these crowds, because, a lot of women photojournalists would tell you that on assignments, when we go out, we're the only women in a crowd of men. Like there have been times when I've just kept my camera down. The other lady, because she was a woman, I think somewhere you connect, and she would look at me. We would just exchange a glance, and I would, you can just be like sympathetic with that glance also. And once we'd have that exchange, then I would pick up my camera and I would shoot. And I've done this a lot of times, and Guri says in the audience, so I'm finally confessing it, that there would have been times when we'd go to photograph people and people would start crying, and I would not shoot the photograph. And I'd tell sir कि sir यही था, उसमें और कुछ नहीं था, कुछ मिला ही नहीं हमको. Because I was like, I don't, I mean, in those cases, nobody was witness, so I could just say that. Yeah. But the point was, it's difficult for us to do it, but over time you just realize that there's a way to connect with people, to not be intrusive, and to make them believe that you're here to do your job. You want to respect their space, and if you strike that note correct, then they understand also, and they let you be. When with the question of you talk about serenity and all of that, I think I really like the idea of being able to, and I think this influence is coming from my mentor Amit sir, to convey emotions through photographs. So I really, for example, I like the idea of talking about someone by their absence. And how do you describe that presence in an absence? You know, it's by their surroundings, right? Like when you go to a masjid that's all burned down. You know, there's that little element of that pot that they use. I'm forgetting what they call, which is a very Islamic thing, and you'd see that in most Muslim houses. I, I feel like that little pot kind of gets to define the entire photograph and contextualize the entire photograph for what it is. So I like to use these symbolisms when talking about people and situations, and I think somewhere like, because even I'm trying to deal with a lot of things in the sense that, you know, there's a lot of violence and you just don't know how to respond to that, and probably the ways when you respond to it is after that violence has ended and you see what remains of it and how people and lives have been affected with it.
That's a lovely answer, Saumya. Thank you. Thank you for
you.
that lovely question, Jesse.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
especially, I think when it comes to really impactful images, they grab us first. But when it comes to these slightly slower, tangential, interpretative images, they are the ones we tend to remember for longer, especially at a time when we are so surrounded by visuals. I want to move to Sudhir Shivram after this.
Hey Saumya, some very powerful images out there. And just to even talk further about even what Bamman said, I think a lot of your images is just not images where when you're showcasing, when you're talking about it, it's not like, okay, this image, I shot it here, this image was taken here. No, you're able to convey stories. And also each of your images convey some very powerful stories. And also like you are able to connect individuals who were there in the story and also convey about what their overall background, other things is. Now, obviously, to convey such kind of a story, you have to get into their life. It's not like you'll just get a few points to talk to them, but to get into their circle of fear, what we call, where they're comfortable sharing with you their stories. So like, how do you overcome these things? Like, how do you make them accept you as a part of like they trying to open up and conveying all these stories to you, conveying about their personal life? So how do you connect with them and overcome these challenges of getting close to them to convey these stories?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not boasting, but people like to have me around. I think I'm like, I think I am good at one-on-one relationships with people, because I'm very conscious of the fact that when I'm going to someone else's space, I'm intruding.
Yes.
And which is why you know, I always give them the space. So which is why I might not be the kind of person who'd be like, hey, come on, let's do something. And I'm probably not the kind of person who'd be like, hey, let's chat with her. But I'm the kind of person who can be silently there, and, you know, people will kind of come back to me when they've dealt with their own stuff. So I think at that level, I think I mean, I just enjoy being with people in those ways, and I enjoy talking to them about their lives. And I think one thing that I really bond well with people over, which is from where I am in Lucknow, usko baketi bolte hain. So, you
Could
know,
you say that again? I missed that. The last line. Could you say that again?
So I'm from Lucknow, और एक शब्द होता है हम लोग यूज करते हैं बकैती.
What does that mean?
It means basically the way every Indian chills, right? I mean, we can really bullshit a lot, right? We can just talk about a lot of things for the sake of fun without any
sense.
Without, sorry, what?
Without making any sense.
Without making any sense, yeah. And I think that's what.
Offense either.
Yeah. No offense and no sense. So, and I think that's what India survives on. I think as a country, we really live on this. So, which is
How much
why
of Baket was happening today in your talk?
हम यहाँ पे नहीं कर पाते हैं ज़्यादा. I do that off camera. I don't do that in front of camera.
सर इतने बड़ी बकैती कोई नहीं कर सकता.
And just a quick follow-up question. Obviously, to get these stories, you need to have your own sources. Okay, so do you have those secret sources where they share the stories with you, where you get information from, anything like that?
नहीं, ऐसा कुछ नहीं होता कि सीक्रेट सोर्सेज होते हैं. आई थिंक एज अ जर्नलिज्म इंडस्ट्री वी ऑल एक्नॉलेज दैट वी सर्वाइव ऑन ईच अदर. So, whenever there are people who would reach out to me, or whenever there are people I would reach out to, everyone is out there to help.
Okay, that's nice to know. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you, Sudhir. Kartar, Kasturi had a very similar question to yours, so I won't bring Kartar on, but a lot of people, in fact, did ask as to how you allow people to trust you enough to let you enter into their space.
I want to share a story about that, Raj, actually.
Yes, yeah.
I was in Assam, and I was photographing stories related to NRC. We just had about 2 days to do that, and we were moving around different parts of Assam to do it. And I met this old lady. She must be, I think, in her 70s or 80s. I can't recall that now. And she had recently lost her son because he committed suicide. His name was not there in the NRC, and he thought he would not have a house. So he committed suicide. Now she would live with the son and his family. Now, the son not being there, the wife and the children went to the wife's house. And the woman was I'm sorry about the sound outside. The woman was left to feed her own self. She had another son, but the son had a huge family, and he wasn't able to provide for her either. So she started crying, and she was very sad, and she was telling me all of that story. And it was obviously sad. You don't know what to do about it. So we took a little time. I heard everything that she had to say. I gave her a hug and everything. And then when she kind of started to soften up, she had short hair. Okay, so I said, you have hair just like mine. Can I have a photograph with you? And she burst out laughing, and then she hugged me again. And then we took a little photograph, and then she hugged me a couple more times again, and we kind of moved on. So I think uh, the thing that always works is for someone else to realize that they can talk to you, they can connect with you, and that you can't really do anything directly to help them, but the little that you can do is to make her smile or kind of comfort her in that moment. So I think these gestures kind of go a long way.
Okay, that's lovely. And related to this, I mean, do you think your presence ever changes the story? That's something that Joseph asked. I believe he had to leave, but he messaged me this to ask you. Does your presence change the story, and how do you cope with that?
In what ways?
Your presence as a photographer, because obviously, like you said, that the bride was happy to have you around because you were the one person she was comfortable with. And
Yeah.
do you think that your presence is something that changes the story? And is that ever a dilemma, or is it much more important to just document what you're witnessing?
So I kind of deal with it differently in when I'm doing some commissioned work and photojournalist work versus when I do some work with, let's say, Muskan back in our village. I think with photojournalism, it's pretty the ethics are very clear on on what and how are we supposed to do and how we're supposed to be navigating the places. But I think for my personal work, I mean, come on, I can't stop living because of my photography. I think I have to be a human first. And there are a lot of times when I've chosen the camera over what's happening in front of me. But then for things that are personal, I would rather you know, let myself go with the flow and respond to how things are happening.
Okay, lovely. There are lots of questions. I think we should just take a screenshot or a copy paste of all the questions, and maybe you can address it at some point of time because we are really running out of time. But thank you for sharing your lovely work. I think I've always admired it, and as Baman said, I really admire how lucidly you spoke of it today. Um I want to just leave the floor to, because you mentioned Amit as one of your mentors and somebody who gave you that nudge and took you into a different direction when it came to photography. I think Amit would probably be the best person to close this, and then I'll move to Devang. Amit?
What should I say about this little naughty girl? I would say rather Bakat. But anyways, Saumya, first of all, would you like to have your fan moment with Baman sir?
Yeah, of course. I'd been wanting. I mean, if I were meeting you in person, I would have hugged you immediately. But
Online hug, huh?
meeting virtually, yeah.
Baman sir, she wanted to hug you in the beginning of the this talk. She said, "I want to have my fan moment." I think she was too shy, so I thought let's bring it on.
Yeah, you've been amazing, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Raj, for such
Thank you.
wonderful
Thank you. That's
moderation.
so sweet of you, Saumya.
Sorry.
You're so sweet. You're so sweet. And you're a photographer and you're a humanitarian. Trust me.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Raj, for such wonderful moderation. Very balanced moderation, I must say. Very intriguing question, very valid questions, and very on dot questions.
Thank you.
As far as Saumya is concerned, what should I say? I feel proud. I feel so proud that I have been given a chance to mentor her, rather, now what you say, teacher, mentor. To me, these are only the words. The notions are different. The notions are what the intentions are. And may whatever I have taught her or I have shared my, rather, I would say, experience with her or with other, uh, all my students or friends, may whatever you say, again, I would say, these are only words. So it doesn't bother me, doesn't matter to me. But the thing is what we share with each other. And it's not only the process of sharing with them or imparting my knowledge with them. You know, it's about learning from them. I am the biggest beneficiary out of this whole game. I am the one who learned a lot. I am the one who learned the most. These guys, I would say, is my strength. There are many times in my life when I fall flat, personally, professionally. These are the people, and I'm not saying now, since 2000, when Ane Goswami used to be with me, and now he's an accomplished cinematographer. Uh, what a wonderful cook he is. So he used to cook for me. So such a lovely guy. We have become soulmate. It's not like teacher, student, assistant, all those kind of things. We are soulmate. Ane is such a wonderful person. And from there onwards, all these guys, whether it's Sahil, Praveen, Saumya, Itika, Jatin, endless. It's a big family. It's a big family. And these are the one from whom I have learned a lot. When we impart our knowledge, whenever we share our things, what comes back, it's unbelievable. Their sheer energy, love, warmth allows me to look at life from different perspective. When you are in your 50s and you are saturated in your mind with your ideas, these are the people who really shook me. 6 years back, had it been the case, she just told today about she was mentioning, hey, Dalai Lama, when I got the story of His Holiness Dalai Lama, I realized that His Holiness is a cool guy. She just said. So 6-7 years back, had it been the case, I would say, oh, hang on, there was a difference. How can you say something like this? But I have learned this lingo. I have moved into their space, and there is nothing wrong. This is their language. There is nothing wrong with the intention at all. But I would say, oh, His Holiness Dalai Lama, maybe G. But their idea of he's a cool guy, yeah. So many things, so many beautiful experiences I have with all these guys. Endless. Such a wonderful journey, emotional moment for me. Again, many of these guys have given me so much. Anyway, I can go on. Uh, Only thing I would say, may our tribe get stronger. May our tribe multiplies. Thank you, Saumya. Thank you, all of you. Thank you so much. Proud of you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much, Saumya. Devang, over to you.
Thanks, Raj. These sessions have been have gone on to become uh, I don't know. I'm at loss of words and a lot of emotions flowing through everybody. And one thing is so beautiful, that we are fortunate, we are blessed. First, we had Vinay, and him sharing about his mentors being Fauzan and Raisab, and then today Saumya is there, and we have these kind of stories we typically hear. Sorry to say, but normally we hear these kind of stories posthumously, when and we are kind of fortunate. नहीं sir, मैं वही बोल रहा हूँ कि normally that is why we are fortunate that this kind of a combination of a mentor and protege is being coming up every day in our series. And I think this is what makes the time, the effort, and everything that has gone in this series so far so valuable. One thing I would just like to share: a few days back, I was having a call with Amit Mehraji, and Mehra Sahab, told
Cut
me.
this up.
Sorry?
Please cut this up.
मेहरा जी के साथ में कॉल हो रहा था. So he this was very early in the series, I think, just maybe second or third day, and he mentioned something to me. You guys don't realize, but you are documenting and you are archiving the story of photography in our country. And believe me, this sentence I could not understand till just about a couple of days back, and that's when it started dawning upon me and Ashit and Vinay that what is happening here is really, really beautiful. It has been beyond our expectations. We have been doing these sessions, and we always love to hear from everyone, but the kind of sharing that is happening is unbelievable. So thank you so much, Saumya, for sharing such beautiful work. It's heart wrenching, it's soul stirring, but at the same time, it is what it is. It is the truth, and you have you have portrayed the truth so beautifully. So thank you for doing that. And I understood Baketi when you said it, because I've grown up in Kanpur. I was in Kanpur for 20 years. So yeah, thank you, Raj, for moderating the session once again, picking up the questions. And Saumya, believe me, what Raj said is true. We have a huge list of questions. So what we're going to do is we're just going to compile the whole chat and we'll send it to you. Maybe you can just refer the questions, and maybe the participants can write to you or reach out to you directly on your email IDs. Thank you to all the panelists once again. And I just want to share our program for tomorrow and day after. And so here it is. Tomorrow we have Sudhir Shivram sharing his beautiful work from the wildlife genre of photography. And then we have Rid Berman. Just for everybody to note, Rid Berman's session is at 3:30 p.m. Although it is very clearly there on the screen, but because we have been having this series at 3, just a small change in time on the last day. He had certain commitments which were kind of coinciding with the time, so it's at 3:30 p.m. Before I close this session, Saumya, there is one question which I wanted to ask, because it has come on YouTube, and I think it would be apt to ask you this question. Varun Shah asked on YouTube that all these pictures show that you are really inspired by Amit sir. So what do you have to say about that comment from
Well,
Varun?
that's a correct observation to make. I sure am inspired, very inspired by his works. And I think in every person's journey, there are times when, you find inspirations in some work, and then there are times when you grow out of those inspirations. So, and maybe, I would still be borrowing from his ideas and thoughts and his styles in many ways, but maybe I would be growing over them also. So yeah, I sure agree with that.
I think he'll be happy with that. But
like Amit said, it's a two-way street.
Time to grow out, time to grow out. I have an analogy. The other day, this Tarun said a wonderful thing about, flower. He mentioned that uh, uh, I'm just like a flower. He was telling about himself. I'm just like a flower. Today I am here. I'm at full bloom. Tomorrow I will drop down and some other flower will come. What I realize in my life and what I learned from flower, it's like jitna khiloge utna, jitna khuloge utna khiloge. So it's all about life, jitna life mein khuloge utna hi khiloge. So just be open to life, let it come. As Vinay said, sir, aane do, aane do. So that, aane do is such a open thing. Just be open to life और आने दो और खिलते रहोगे अपने आप ही. और बाकी ये good to have two buckets on the panel. I did this Kanpuria and Lucknowi.
And good for me to learn a new word.
One second. Drama तो I have to do every single time.
Oh yes.
Yeah, थोड़ा बनता है ना, थोड़ा ड्रामा, थोड़ा कॉमेडी, थोड़ा ड्रामा, थोड़ा हंसा के जाना भी चाहिए. कि सौम्या बहुत too much. I got very emotional. Put me on the gallery. Don't put me on the gallery. I like to see everyone's face. Too much emotion. I don't know what all was going on inside of me, and but you owe me. Who's going to pay for all these tissues? Please explain that. Who's going to pay for all of this?
Khandelwal.
Oh my God.
There's one
Thank
more
you so
thing.
much, sir.
There's one more thing, Saumya. आपने महाभारत पढ़ी है?
ज्यादा वास्ता नहीं है हमारा रिलीजन से ज्यादा वास्ता नहीं है. I'm sorry about that.
पासवान सर को मजा नहीं आएगा अगर आपने महाभारत नहीं पढ़ी है.
पासवान किधर है?
Lovely. God bless you all. Great.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you to all the friends. Thank you to all the participants. Yeah.
Thank you so much.